The airport buzzed with the usual chaos, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing, and hurried footsteps crossing polished marble floors. To everyone else, it was just another day. But to me, it felt like standing in the middle of a battlefield. My father walked ahead with his chest puffed out, surrounded by our relatives as if they were his audience. His laughter carried over the crowd. Sharp, commanding, the kind of laughter that demanded attention. I followed a few steps behind, clutching my small, worn-out suitcase, the only one I could afford. "Amara, hurry up," he barked without looking back. "You walk as slowly as your life moves." The relatives laughed. My aunt whispered something under her breath, and they all chuckled again. I pretended not to hear. Pretending had become a habit around them, a fragile shield to hide behind. We stopped near the check-in counter. My father's expensive leather bag was carried by one of his assistants, while mine dangled from my trembling hand. I had saved for months just to afford a ticket home. But the moment I handed over my card, the agent looked up apologetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined." The words hit me like a stone to the chest. I tried again, fumbling with my phone, praying silently. The second attempt failed too. My father's voice cut through the air. "Declined." "Of course it is." He turned to the relatives, grinning. "She's useless. Can't even afford economy class." Laughter erupted around us, harsh and echoing off the airport walls. My vision blurred. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to vanish between the luggage carts and cold stares. He wasn't done. He reached for my suitcase, yanked it from my hand, and tossed it aside. It landed with a dull thud, the zipper bursting slightly open. My clothes spilled out onto the glossy tiles, wrinkled shirts, a small photo of my late mother, and the notebook where I scribbled dreams I never dared to speak aloud. "There," he said, dusting his hands as though I were filth. "That's what comes of defying me. You chose to be independent, didn't you? Well, independence comes with hunger." The relatives nodded, pretending sympathy, but delighting in the spectacle. I could feel their pity cutting deeper than their laughter. Every pair of eyes in that terminal seemed to look at me, judging, enjoying. I bent down slowly, collecting my things with shaking hands. The photo of my mother stared up at me, her soft smile a quiet comfort in the storm. My throat ached, but I refused to cry. "Dad, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This isn't necessary." He leaned closer, his words sharp and deliberate. "You stopped being my daughter when you refused to marry Arjun. You think the world runs on feelings. No. Girl, it runs on money, and you have none." That final sentence sliced through me. I stood still, my heart pounding, the humiliation suffocating. Then, just as I tried to steady my breath, a calm, authoritative voice interrupted. "Excuse me, ma'am." I turned. A man in a pristine Navy uniform stood beside me, a pilot, tall and composed, with a clipboard in hand. His tone carried respect that felt foreign in that moment. "Are you Miss Amara Sen?" he asked. I blinked, confused. "Why, yes." He nodded politely. "Your private jet is ready for departure. The crew has been waiting. Please, allow me to escort you." The world went silent. The laughter froze midair. My father's mouth fell open, his arrogance crumbling like sand underwater. "What did you just say?" he demanded, stepping forward. The pilot glanced at him briefly, then returned his gaze to me. "Your private jet, ma'am. We're scheduled to depart in 20 minutes. Shall I have your luggage loaded?" Every eye turned to me. The same people who had just ridiculed me now looked as if the floor had vanished beneath their feet. My father's face drained of color. My aunt's smirk twisted into disbelief. I slowly straightened my back and met the pilot's eyes. "Yes," I said quietly. "Please take care of it," as he bent to retrieve my suitcase. I caught my father's reflection in the glass wall behind him. His pride collapsing, his authority melting away. For the first time, he had nothing to say. And as I followed the pilot toward the VIP gate, I whispered under my breath, almost to myself, "This is just the beginning." The sound of the airport still haunted me long after that day. The echo of laughter, the thud of my suitcase hitting the ground, my father's cold voice ringing in my ears. It became a memory that refused to fade, carved into my bones like a scar. When the jet doors had closed behind me, the world outside blurred into clouds. I didn't own that plane, not then. At least, it belonged to a man I barely knew, Mr. Raymond Carter, the CEO of a global tech conglomerate. He had seen the entire scene unfold from the first-class lounge. Later, I learned he had been impressed not by my status, but by the fact that I had stood silently, without anger, without tears. "You didn't break," he would say. "That's rare." That day, he offered me a lift. His plane was flying to Singapore, and he said I looked like someone who needed to leave something behind. I accepted, numb and wordless, unsure if I was escaping or beginning anew. The years that followed were a long, slow rebirth. I rented a tiny room above a bakery in Singapore. The smell of fresh bread every morning was the only warmth I had. I took any job that came my way: waitressing, data entry, cleaning offices after midnight. Each coin I earned was a small rebellion against my father's words. Sometimes, exhaustion would press so heavily on my chest that I'd collapse into bed without eating. Yet, even in those moments, I refused to give up. My mother's old photograph sat by my window. Her eyes seemed to whisper, "Keep going." My father had disowned me the day I refused his arranged marriage. He wanted me to marry Arjun Malhotra, the son of his business partner. To merge two companies through a wedding, I said no. I wanted to build my own path, not be traded like property. That single act of defiance had branded me as ungrateful, rebellious, and worthless in his world. But the truth was, I had always loved creating things. Numbers, designs, solutions. They spoke to me in ways people never could. I used my nights to learn coding from free online tutorials, watching videos on a cracked laptop I bought secondhand. By the second year, I had landed a small internship at a local startup. My supervisor, Elena, became the first real friend I had since my mother died. She was tough but kind. She believed in me when no one else did. "Don't prove them wrong, Amara," she told me once as we shared instant noodles after work. "Prove yourself right." Her words became my fuel. Over the next few years, I climbed quietly. I built an app that connected small artisans to buyers without middlemen. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest work, and it started to grow. Investors began to notice. People began to know my name. Meanwhile, news from home trickled in occasionally through social media. My father's empire, Sen Enterprises, was struggling. Corruption scandals, bad investments, and betrayal by those he trusted. I didn't gloat, I just watched silently, remembering every word he'd said at that airport. By the time I turned 28, I had saved enough to start my own company, Avalon Technologies. It grew faster than I could have imagined. I poured every ounce of my pain into it, building something stable and pure, something mine. But through all the success, I remained silent about my past. No one knew who my father was, or what he had done. I wanted to build my name from scratch, untainted by his legacy. Then, one morning, I received a message from an event organizer. "You've been selected as the keynote speaker for the International Business Leadership Summit, held at the Mumbai International Airport Convention Center." I stared at the screen for a long time. That airport, the same place where my father had called me useless. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with something sharper, steadier. The years of silence were ending. The time had come to return, not as the broken girl who had been humiliated, but as the woman who had learned to fly without anyone's wings. By the time I walked into my new office for the first time, the city skyline glittered like 1,000 promises. I had built Avalon Technologies from nothing. Every late night, every skipped meal, every sacrifice had led to this moment. Yet, standing in the sleek, glass-walled office on the 42nd floor, I felt no triumph, only quiet resolve. Success had not come easily. Investors were skeptical at first. They doubted a young woman with no pedigree, no backing, no connections. My early pitches were met with polite smiles that hid doubt. But each no became a spark, each setback a lesson. I learned faster, worked harder, and watched closely. I learned that power was not about wealth alone. It was about vision, intelligence, and patience. Within 5 years, Avalon Technologies had grown into a global powerhouse. Our software platforms connected small businesses worldwide. And our logistics systems were being used by corporations twice the size of my father's empire. The name, Amerisen, once a punchline in family gossip, now carried weight in boardrooms from Singapore to New York. I rarely thought of my father. It wasn't out of forgiveness. It was strategy. Pain is dangerous when carried carelessly. It can make you predictable, reactive, weak. Instead, I stored it, folded it into ambition, and let it fuel me silently. Yet, fate has a way of bringing the past forward when you least expect it. One afternoon, as I reviewed quarterly reports in my office, my assistant, Priya, handed me a thick envelope marked with an embossed gold seal. "It's from the International Business Leadership Summit, ma'am," she said. I opened it carefully. Inside was an official invitation keynote speaker. The event was a prestigious international gathering of business leaders, investors, and dignitaries, held at none other than Mumbai International Airport. For a moment, the world tilted. The same airport where my father had humiliated me, where my suitcase had been tossed aside, and my pride crushed in front of relatives and strangers alike. I remembered the laughter, the shame, the shock on their faces when a pilot had unexpectedly announced a private jet for me years ago. That day had been the first step of my journey. Now, destiny was calling me back. I didn't call my father. I didn't send invitations. I didn't gloat. I prepared. Every speech, every presentation, every detail of my attire and demeanor would reflect the woman I had become. Confident, precise, unstoppable. When I boarded my first class flight to Mumbai for the summit, I saw my reflection in the cabin window and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the timid girl who flinched at laughter. In her place stood someone polished, commanding, and unshakable. A woman whose failures had been forged into armor. The journey itself felt symbolic. Below me, cities shrank to tiny patterns, and I thought about the years of struggle. The tiny rooms, the odd jobs, the relentless grind. Every small victory had been a step toward this moment, and I felt a profound satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge, and everything to do with self-respect. As the plane descended toward Mumbai, I could already feel the energy of the airport. Crowds moving like rivers, announcements echoing through cavernous halls. I knew that among the attendees, my father would be present. Not knowing how or if he would recognize me didn't matter. The game had changed. For the first time, I allowed myself a quiet smile, not of malice, but of triumph. I had survived his contempt, built my life from nothing, and learned to fly on my own terms. The girl who had once been tossed aside with a suitcase in her hand had become a force no one could ignore. And as the runway lights flickered beneath the plane's wheels, I whispered to myself, almost reverently, "This time, I arrive on my own terms. The summit would be the stage, the airport the arena, and the past the fuel." The airport was alive with movement, lights bouncing off polished floors, announcements echoing through the terminals. But to me, it felt almost like a stage, a place frozen in time, where memories of humiliation and betrayal lingered in the shadows. I stepped off the shuttle and straightened my shoulders. The years of struggle, of silent endurance, had led me here. Every ounce of fear and self-doubt had been transformed into poise, into confidence that radiated from me like heat. I was no longer the girl whose father had laughed at her inability to buy an economy ticket. I was Amara Sen, founder and CEO of Avalon Technologies, a woman who now held power in her own hands. Security cleared me quickly. My credentials as a keynote speaker opened doors that once would have been slammed in my face. And then, in the grand hall where the summit was set to take place, I saw them. My father and his relatives, all draped in designer suits, moving with the arrogance of inherited privilege. I froze for only a moment, letting my gaze trace the lines of his face, the smug curl of his lips. He didn't see me yet. I let the moment linger. Years ago, he had tossed my suitcase aside as if I were nothing. Now, he and everyone who had laughed at me were completely unaware of the storm that had grown quietly behind me. Then it happened. A man in a perfectly pressed uniform approached me, clipboard in hand, calm and respectful. "Madam Amara, your private jet is ready," he said. The words were soft, polite, yet they struck with the force of a thunderclap. My father's laugh froze in the middle of a sentence. His eyes widened, pupils dilating in disbelief. My aunt gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. The relatives who had ridiculed me for years were suddenly speechless. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not cruel, not gloating, just satisfaction. I turned to the pilot and nodded. "Please have my luggage loaded," I said calmly. Every eye followed me as I walked past the stunned crowd. My father's voice, when it came, was raw with shock. "Amara, what how?" I paused for just long enough to let the words hang in the air. "It's simple, Dad. I worked. I learned. I built something of my own." He opened his mouth again, but I ignored him. My family's whispers reached my ears, half disbelief, half anger, half envy. Years of mockery and humiliation had not prepared them for this quiet, unshakable power I now carried. The summit organizers, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding, waited for me. I moved forward with steady steps, head held high. The airport that had once witnessed my humiliation was now the arena of my triumph. Every stride was a declaration. The girl who had been tossed aside with a cheap suitcase was gone. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect, whose success could not be denied. Behind me, my father's attempts to speak were muffled by the murmurs of those around him. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to fight. Silence was enough. The shock of seeing the powerless girl transformed into a leader, a force, a success that eclipsed his own empire, was punishment enough. As I reached the jet, I glanced back once. His eyes were fixed on me, rage, fear, and disbelief tangled together. The humiliation he had inflicted on me years ago had now come full circle, but this time, I held the power. The pilot opened the door to the jet. I stepped inside gracefully, letting the door close behind me, leaving my father and the relatives staring in stunned silence. And as the engines roared to life, I allowed myself a small, private thought. I no longer need his approval. I never did. From the window, the terminal shrank beneath me, the crowds dwindled into dots. And the airport, the stage of my greatest humiliation, disappeared into the horizon. My heart swelled, not with revenge alone, but with freedom. For the first time in my life, I was truly untouchable. I leaned back in my seat, letting the clouds carry me forward, leaving behind the echoes of laughter, the weight of betrayal, and the shadow of a father who had once defined my worth. The past had tried to break me, humiliate me, and hold me down. But I had risen above it all, not just with wealth, or power, or success, but with dignity, resilience, and self-respect. And that, more than anything, was my ultimate triumph.